Okay, our History Society started in 2000, and we moved into this old elementary school here in 2007. We didn't have a museum, we had a museum downtown. So anyway, we have two rooms in what was the elementary school for the St. Croix Falls School District that opened in 1956. And the rural schools closed around here in about 56, 57. And so I was going to Wolf Creek School and through 5th grade, and then this opened up and the little schools closed, and so I came here, and it was kind of downhill for me because I was the second smartest kid in the Wolf Creek School in my grade. And here I became the 22nd smartest kid. Just one year change. It's really quite traumatic.
Russ, I think you and I had 7th and 8th grade in this room.
Yes.
Mrs. Sorensen.
Yeah, she was very difficult. Okay, so anyway, the History Society, as I was saying, is celebrating 25 years. We have these two rooms. We're open every Monday, 10 to 2, and by appointments. This Saturday is Cushing Fun Day, so we'll be open for that. And also downstairs, 1 through, I don't know, 1 through 6 or something, is a class reunion. Come on in, there's some chairs over here and here and here. Okay, and there's one right here that's comfortable. And anyway, so we'll be open Saturday, something like 10 to 2 here, but also downstairs is the all St. Croix Falls School District reunion in the afternoon. And so if you went to anywhere in the St. Croix Falls district, they've been doing an all-school one. And then at 5 o'clock, my own class of 1965 is having our 60th class reunion at the pizzeria in Dresser. So anyway, so that's all, just some announcements here. And then next Saturday, during the Cushing Fun Day also, our emphasis here, instead of being Sweden and Swedish stuff, we'll be bringing out the Lake Township stuff because that's 150 years old, and so we're celebrating a little bit with them. We sort of forced the town board into saying yes, they would allow us to celebrate, whereas West Sweden, which of course you all have heard of, Township is 150, and they're having, I think it's this Saturday, root beer floats up at the Frederick Senior Center. And that's a really Swedish community up there. Okay, so we're going to take a little bit of a tour of why this area has some Swedish roots in it. And so let's see if I've got this going. So first of all, to show you that I have Swedish roots, that's the house my great-great-grandfather built in Skee, S-K-E-E, Skee, they pronounce it, Sweden, near Stromstad. And that's my cousin Arnie, who is a dairy farmer, and his wife Lillian. They're both passed away, but we visited them in 2003. And they farmed in a valley between two ridges, two granite ridges. There we're having at their, this is a Swedish lunch. Actually, this is the after lunch when we're having our cocktails and our dessert, isn't it? Our watermelon, maybe? This is about midsummer. We went over there to visit them in midsummer. And so, and I snuck back in the airplane a sample of dirt from the farm because I wanted to sprinkle it on our common great-great-grandfather's grave in western Minnesota, his and my great-great-grandfather, and on our and the other descendants. So I brought that back, and of course I didn't. You're not supposed to do stuff like that, and so I put it in my wife's luggage, just in case. This is an old picture of the place in Sweden, the Skee church, and then there's a little tower. This is really close to the Norway border and the coast. I'll show you in a minute. But that tower was sort of a 1200, maybe a little earlier, building for protecting the area because there were raids that came up that valley. And then the church is something like 1200 also. And my ancestors are buried in that cemetery. So here's where that is. You see, it's interesting, that little piece there of Sweden is a loop, it's a fjord that has a round loop, and so at their farm, if you look to the east, west, and north, you see Norway. And so we're really in there. And actually, until they divided Norway and Sweden, my great-grandpa came from the Kingdom of Norway and Sweden, it says on his immigration papers. And he said when they finally made the division in something like 1905 or that, he said, "Oh, we're Swedes," because he was never quite sure. Okay, so I first have to give you the history. I'm going to finish my family pretty quick. So this is, Carolyn Modine, who you probably knew as a member of your club, told us that there's something called creative fiction. She was a writer, and creative fiction is that you know some facts, but you don't know the details, and so you have to make up a little bit of it. And so I'll read this. This is my creative fiction of how the family got to Skea, Sweden. The ice had receded in Skea, Sweden, 15,000 years ago, and Ole Luigi Hanson and the missus migrated back from sunny southern Italy, where his ancestor Lars Ole Hansen and family had gone 100,000 years earlier to escape the glaciers. See, now that's possible. Over the next 15,000 years, the family advanced through the Wood Age, the Antler Age, the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Plastic Age, and Rock and Roll Age to become small farmers in the isolated Skea Valley on the Sweden-Norway border. Generations of inbreeding. Now, you didn't climb over the hills to the next valley to find a wife. It was too much work. Anyways, with occasional generations of inbreeding, with occasional Viking raids to bring in new blood, bring us to the mid-1800s when Ole Lars Hansen. Now, if you look at my records, it's generally, you can say Hans Lars, Ole Hansen, or Ole Larsen, endlessly recycling those names, okay? Got tired of breaking his plow on the same rock that 30 generations of his grandfathers had broken their plows, buying many sticks of a new invention, dynamite, from his nearby neighbor, L. Nobel, who invented dynamite. He placed them under the rock's edge, hoping to break it loose. Well, the rock was not nearly as big as he had expected, and the blast flung it far into the sky. It landed on the top of rich, corrupt, and mean Sheriff Hans Ole Johnson's house, a quarter-mile away, doing great damage. "Here's your inheritance, 100 riksdaler," said his father, Hans Lars Olesen, digging up the small metal box that held the family savings for many generations. "Run to Stromstad and get on the first boat to America, and don't look back at those topless blonde girls on the beach or you'll be lost." Great-grandpa sailed to Wisconsin, married a brown-haired inland girl who wore 3 layers of clothing even at the beach, had a large family, and made his fortune helping farmers dynamite stumps around Cushing. His long use of dynamite damaged his hearing so bad that 4 generations of Hansons have inherited it. So that's my my story, and I think that's probably pretty accurate. So why did they come to this part of the state? Great-grandpa said when he was asked, "Why did you come to this place when you went through Iowa and all this wonderful level land and black dirt? Why did you come up this far before you homesteaded?" And he said, "Well, we kept going north until it was just as bad as it was we left in Sweden." which the farm in Sweden that my great-great-grandpa, in 1824 there was a land reform, and somehow or other great-great-grandpa, great-great-great-grandpa and his wife actually got land from being, instead of living on the church farm called the Klockengarten, which was the bell ringer's farm. His job was officially the bell ringer for the church. But anyway, so he got land, and so they were landowners. However, he had 3 boys and a girl, and the boys knew that only one of them could have the farm, really. It wasn't big enough, and their father wasn't that old that he was really willing to give it up. So all 3 boys came to America. And the attraction to Wisconsin was in 1871, for instance, when my great-grandfather came, this land was homestead available. You could come in and get land for almost nothing, but just filing on it and improving it. And so that was a place where it was. Plus, logging was going on, and these guys knew how to do logging, and so great-grandpa got a job over in Barron County with Knapp Stout, the big lumber company, and worked there for a few years, and then homesteaded some land. So anyway, so there was land available here because of the Homestead Acts. If you look at the census for Sterling Township, I'm doing that one because that's along the river, and that was settled first. Became a township in 1855. Lake Town was 1875, and Eureka was 1874. So they're newer or later ones. Anyway, there was only one person born in Sweden in all of Sterling Township, and Sterling Township at that time covered all of northern Polk County, all of Burnett County, and Wabasha, because nobody lived up here. Not Wabasha, what's that? Washburn. Yeah, because there was no other government, and so Sterling covered it all. And there was only one person born in Sweden that was actually a resident here, Peter Barnes. And by 1870, there were 50 families in Sterling, at that time included Lake Town. And if you think about that, the families were probably 4 or 5 at least, maybe more kids. So we're talking several hundred Swedish settlers here. And my great uncle, the first one came in 1864, my great-grandfather in 1871. The settlements in this area that were Swedish, well, we all know Trade Lake is a big Swedish area. Trade River, like up there by the church, that's Swedish area. Atlas is quite a bit Swedish, although it's always mixed. Here in Sterling Township, the first ones were out along the St Croix River. And that was because those places is where the logging was going on, Trade River was, and the first actual first Scandinavian here was Knut Anderson Township up in Burnett County, which was part of Sterling, was named after him. And out here, if you go out on Evergreen Avenue on what we call the Barrens out towards the river, about 10 miles west of here, there's a little cemetery where Trade River crosses the road, and that was a Swedish mission church from the Zion Lutheran Church up at Trade Lake, or Four Corners, or Trade Lake, whatever they call it. That was sort of the mother church for all of the Swedes that came to this part of the area, including like up to Alpha, and that. Farming out on the Barrens was not very good. It was sandy soil, a little bit of topsoil, and so although it was easy to farm, it didn't last very long. And so if we look at the 3 townships we're in, I'm going to walk up here a minute. I will. Okay, so what we're looking at is Swedish settlement along the St. Croix here, along Trade River here, and then a little bit later out in here. Also up here by, this would be Alabama, okay. there was a settlement of folks from Alabama up here. But Atlas area, which is, this is Freedom Lake, so it'd be right in there was quite a bit of Swedish. This side of Cushing was quite a bit Danish, and down here was mixture of Scandinavians, but the Danish folks sort of clustered more between here and Loch and Bone Lake, whereas the Swedes did have these sort of settlements in the area. If you were to look at the 1887 West Sterling along the river, that's the only people that were living there, and their families like Lundqvist and Anderson and Peterson, and those were the Swedish settlements. Not very far across the river is Lindstrom and all that, and so there was this swath of Swedes over in Minnesota had came already in the 1850s, on up through here, and if you go up to like through Trade River and Atlas, and then on up to Trade Lake, and on through Alpha and Fallen and Siren, there was kind of a swath up there of and it sort of followed the river, St. Croix River and Trade River. This is along Trade River. Out there, this is 1887, and right where the two river branches come together, Trade River and Cowan Creek, is where there was a settlement. And that was where the church and the cemetery was, and the town hall was, and and the folks along the river there are like Andersons, and they're almost all Swedish. And then at the very place where Trade River goes into the St. Croix Falls is the England family, and I'm going to feature those a little bit more. 1860, late 1860s, 1870s settlement, and on, but there was a lot of area out there that was just not settled. So where the Swedes were out west of us in Sterling on Evergreen Avenue was their church and cemetery. The church started in about 1876, and it was a mission church from the Trade Lake Zion Lutheran, because there were a bunch of Swedes out there, and transportation to Trade Lake wasn't reasonable. So they had and then they did hire their own minister, had their own cemetery out there, and the cemetery's still there. Here's a picture of it now. A little chapel has been put on the site where the original church was, log church was, and the it's kept up by the township. The fences around it were put in probably around 1910, pipes. The last thing that the Ladies' Aid had a little bit of money in their account, and so they decided to put a fence around it to try to preserve the location of the cemetery. Behind this, I'm looking to the east, is right down the hill is Trade River. So this hill overlooked the river. It was kind of a nice site. It's grown up a little bit to trees now. So the two families that we're going to look at along the St. Croix River was the Lundqvist family, and there's still some of those around here. This is what Raymond Lundqvist, who passed away now too, but he wrote about his family. In 1874 they came, and they homesteaded out along the St. Croix River, and let's see, there's just, well, they had a bunch of family and they lived out there for a while. And then, like the rest of the folks, by the 1890s it got really dry, the wind started blowing, sand was blowing all over the place, and it blew the Swedes out of the barrens to better places. They moved out east of Wolf Creek, east of the river road, where it was hardwoods, and you had to really, instead of just put your plow down in the prairie, you had to cut the trees down and everything. Why they settled on the St. Croix and Trade River was the rest of the area of the barrens was really open prairie, and along the rivers were trees, and so you had your best. You could farm on the edge, and you could also have trees. So here's the Lundqvist family out on the barrens, and they had a nice house in that. Their barn was the log barn. The picture, all that's left if you go up to where they lived, which is now part of the, let's see, the state forest, Governor Knowles State Forest, I guess you'd call it, is that well, which they may have filled in. About 20 years ago, I went out there with the person who owned it then, Linda Harris, and we were looking around, and there were boards over this well, but this is about a 25-foot well. It's all made of rocks and everything. It's really quite nice. And she said, yeah, the water's still good in it. That's a log barn there. Here's on the front porch. So I couldn't quite figure out what she's holding. Is that a dog, a cat? Yeah. So this was the entrance to their house. This is after they had put siding over the logs. So Raymond Lundquist had written up the story, and anyway, he said that this is the summary of it. They were early pioneers. They came from Sweden in 1871, had two brothers that settled on, they had each 160 acres, and they struggled to make a living, and the church was important. Now we're going to switch to the other family that's kind of interesting. These came in 1869, the England family, and why I know about them is this book here, which we republished. Eric England in 1924 wrote a story of his family. He was, I believe, 12 years old when he came from Sweden, and told about living out there and what it was like, and they eventually had to sell out in about 88 or 9. They were right on the St Croix River, and they were building Nevers Dam, which flooded their lowlands along the river, so they sold the land on the river. But I can pass this around. It's kind of I liked it because it actually, he tells about what it was like settling out here. The local folks call where the Trade River hits the St. Croix Falls Angling Bay, although it's gotten corrupted to Angling Bay, and nobody probably in the younger generation has any knowledge of that was the name of it. There was this book here, I actually have it online too, but anyway, let's go on here. So in his book, he tells a little bit about some of the things. When they first came, they were used to fireplaces for cooking. And so he says, this is when they were still in St. Croix Falls, before they actually went out on the Barrens. They were renting a place as they were trying to figure out where to homestead. We were somewhat disappointed and puzzled to find no fireplace in the house we moved into. There was no place to cook. But after cooking a few meals out by outdoor fires, we bought a stove. That was something so rare in our part of Sweden then, that although we had heard of built-in stoves, not movable, we had never seen one of any kind. However, we soon learned to manipulate the contrivance satisfactorily and haven't missed the old-fashioned fireplace since, except the cheer of it on a winter evening. I wish I could show you a picture of that first stove. The oven was situated in the back of and higher than the fire space and the lids for cooking, so that its front legs were about 12 inches high and the hind legs 18 inches high, and the bottom of the stove was on the oven was on the level with the top of the stove. So I looked on the internet trying to find something that matched his description, and my guess is that's probably is about what he was trying to describe, but I'm not sure. The Homestead law gave 160 acres of government land on the condition of 5 years of residence and some improvements. And he's writing this, Eric was. Okay, was one of the factors inducing our immigration. In a very short time, father filed for a homestead entry on 160 acres on the bank of the St. Croix River at the mouth of Trade River, some 15 miles above St. Croix Falls. And then he describes where it is. Part of the land was a large natural meadow, that would be right on the river, but the part possible of tilling was stony and wooded and extremely hard to bring into cultivation. Along the St. Croix and Trade River it's eaten down, so it's not sand so much as it is rocky and gravelly. The meadow is now in the flowage of Nevers Dam and is known as England Bay. So that picture over there just shows where Trade River goes into the thing. Here he describes his first house. We lived in from the autumn of 1869 onward, and while we thrived physically, it was in most senses a primitive life. Our house was of round logs with the bark on it, probably jack pines. Our house was, the cracks plastered with clay, the roof of boards all leaning one way, which served as a ceiling too. It was a one-room shanty the size of 12/16, but for use of the kitchen and the storeroom in winter there was an addition. And lived there 7 years. They put, and it says they put siding over it eventually. Now we're going to move out of the Barrens, as the Swedish settlers did, to the east side of the river road in Wolf Creek, because the farming was no good over there. And so, here, let's go back. So, if you go straight out of Cushing, going 87 goes straight west, then it goes north. Okay, if you continued on going straight west, you hit something called, the folks called Swede Road, and there were Swansons and Andersons and Nordstroms, and it was lined with Swedish folks out there. So anyway, the local people called it Swede Road, and so that was, some of the ones that had actually been out on the Barrens and moved out to get some better farming area. This area here is the east part of Sterling Township, from Cushing in the bottom right corner up to Burnett County on the top. The folks that lived out on the Barrens, mostly Swedes, had a picnic area right where that cemetery and church was, just down the hill on the river. And they moved out like by 1907 the church closed. And anyway, in 1939 they decided to have a midsummer picnic out there. And so right at the end of June, essentially, the fourth Sunday in June, they had their reunion picnic of the folks that had lived out on the Barrens. They didn't say it was a midsummer picnic because they were quite religious, and midsummer was sort of a pagan holiday, you know, and so they called it an old settlers picnic, but it was meant to be a midsummer picnic, and it was primarily Swedish, but anyone was welcome that was there. And so each year since 1939 we've had a old settlers picnic, although now it's here in the downstairs in here. So this year was something like our 86th year of that picnic, which is really a midsummer celebration, and but we don't really think of it as just Swedish. Okay, I'm going to end up here quickly. We all get letters from Sweden, or have found them, or books or old records, and so one of the magic things you can do nowadays is using artificial intelligence. And so I took an example here. This is a letter that Betty Franzen gave me to take a look at. I thought it was quite nice handwriting in Swedish. And so I took and scanned that picture of that thing on the left, and then I uploaded it to an artificial intelligence program called ChatGPT.com, which you can use free, or you can use a subscribe and pay for it too if you want to do more work. And I said, what does this letter say? And so it says, here's what it thinks it says. And so we're assuming that this is written from Sweden to America because it was over here. And the letter on the left says, this is what the translation is. And so making use of this, one of the projects our group is doing is the Lake Town Lutheran Church, which tends to be Norwegian, although it started as a Scandinavian church, and its original records are written in Swedish. And so we brought over last Monday, we brought over the Swedish minister's book, which has all the things like who owns the cemetery lots, who owns or who got confirmed on what day, and it runs from 1879 till somewhere in its 20s, and it switches to English. But anyway, so I just scanned a double page of the book, put it in, and asked, what does this say? And it said, okay, it explained to me, or to the person from the church and I that were working on it, it said, okay, this is telling the discussion over building that church. They were going to build it out of logs. It's still up there, and it's still made out of logs. But anyway, the discussion and then the sort of back and forth on how big it should be and what type of logs and stuff. And it commented, the thing says, this is typical of an old church record and of the discussions they had in the church board about how to do things, and you can see some tension in there as different people have different opinions. And anyway, the person who was here from the church said, you know, that's exactly how church board meetings go now. So anyway, that's some magic that if you're wondering about your Swedish documents or your old Swedish records, this is really good. It has problems. It does pretty good because it can do context if it doesn't quite figure out a word. Because what it's doing is, I give it a picture of that page. So the first thing it's doing is reading it and converting it into Swedish text as words. And then after it's got it into Swedish words, Swedish language, it shows you that. Then it says, I'm going to translate it into English using the knowledge it has about Old Swedish and maybe how sentence structure might be. And so it changed it into not the Swedish grammar where words are reversed and things like that. Changed it into what we would understand better. And then and it's relatively interesting, so let's just take a look. Dear Carlson and Lovis, I think that might be Lewis, but
No,
it does.
it's Lovis.
Lovis,
Yes,
oh, okay,
it's a
so
girl.
that's probably right
It's a girl.
then. Okay, all right. And I don't know what Carlson would be. That's like a last name or something.
But that's
Anyway,
what they address.
After a long silence between us, and you can tell us how we're translating it.
I
Is it
can't
what the-
read the,
Oh,
not that I
okay.
can't read the cursive.
Yeah, that's
It's too far
okay.
for me to read.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so
too
anyway,
close.
I want to write, this is pretty interesting, I want to write a few lines, let you know where we live. We now live in Vetlanda, and Lars is out working every weekday, but I got sick in the stomach this spring, so I have not been able to work all summer. One night while I was lying asleep, I went to bed healthy, and when we woke up, I was speechless. I could not talk for several days, and my whole one side was nearly paralyzed, so I was bedridden for several weeks, so like a stroke, right? And after that, I went to the whatever spa and bathed and drank the mineral water. And now I've had 30 treatments with electricity. It was so expensive for us, but now I am much better and can take care of my house myself. So this is one page of a several-page letter, but looking at it, for those of us who don't really read Swedish, you don't have any idea what they're talking about. But
And just as a piece of information, the first word, Vetlanda, is the old spelling. Today there is no H, it's Vetlanda. It's V-E-T-L-A-N-D-A.
Oh, okay.
It's
So,
the old Swedish.
yeah, so I'm relatively impressed because it's reading an older version of Swedish, and anyway, so I find that just so with these records of old church records around here. Let's see, I think that's the end of my. I was going to say that one of our goals here in the museum is digitizing old records before they're lost, and these rural churches are down in attendance, and we don't know how long they might last, and so I've been trying to do, and so for instance, the Lake Town Lutheran Church did pretty good. They kept scrapbooks of their history, and so there are 3 scrapbooks, and we've had a volunteer from their group take the scrapbooks, they're 3-ring binders in plastic, take them apart, scan each page in the plastic, and then turn it into a printed book. So this is the first scrapbook. The second scrapbook just came in this week. The first one is $35, actually cost $28 to print. This is, I believe, $20 because it's smaller. It's in color, although it's sepia tone, but it's, then there's a third one. And then we're working on the actual church records themselves. I'm trying to pry them loose from the church board, and they said, well, if you bring your equipment to the church, we'll open the safe and you can take these out and copy them here, because they're kind of fragile and they're, you know, yeah, anyway, so that's, in our area, Swedish churches included the one out on the Barrens, which was called the Trade River Lutheran Church, and it was independent of Trade Lake for a while. The one at Trade Lake, the Zion Lutheran was Swedish. Trade River Evangelical Free was a Swedish church. When I went there as a kid, and we still sang Swedish hymns every once in a while. And let's see here.
The Trade Lake Baptist Church.
Yeah,
was
Trade
Swedish.
Lake Baptist was Swedish too, right?
That was in 1869.
Yeah, and I think, see, Trade Lake was a really early settlement too. Trade Lake also had the Alabama Methodist Church, because they had the Alabama folks there. But, okay, so what we have in terms of Swedish, Atlas was a Swedish, pretty much Swedish, Norwegian and Swedish, and some Danish, but we have a book on history of Atlas. We have the Lake Town 1 and 2 Lutherans. We have 2 books on the Trade River Valley, which includes Trade Lake and Trade River. It has a lot of Swedish families in it. And let me see, I'm sure, the Eric England book, which is the personal account of someone who settled out there. That might be our extent. We have a lot of old plat books, we have a lot of other stuff.
The books.
So now, I was gonna say, now we can have some coffee or stuff and have a tour if you want. We have Swedish looking napkins, Swedish, something or other, what is that?
Swedish rusks.
Swedish
Swedish
rust? Yeah, and some lemonade and stuff like that, so you're free to get up and, yes.
I'm curious, why didn't you ask how many people here have ancestors in Trade Lake, Atlas, or
Yeah, do you
Trade
have
River?
local Swedish ancestors? Sure, the Hansons do, yeah, yeah,
About current
Yep.
relatives.
current relatives.
And I know Donna Bird was from Elma Lund, so she's just on the other side of the river.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My Hanson name is Swedish, but great-grandpa married a lady from New York with an English background, and Grandpa married a Norwegian, and Dad married a Norwegian, so Swedish is actually only the Hanson and a fractional part of me.
Oh, it's a good part though, yeah.
So Russ,
Yeah.
when I married Sue, I became related by marriage to 50% of the people living north of Highway B.
Highway B.
I live on B.
I know you do.
Her mother was a Malene, so that's related to,
So was Marlene's over here.
yeah, so that relates to about everybody up there.
How are you related to
Yeah.
her?
Cousin.
Anyway,
Her
yeah,
mother, Millie, and my mom, Alice, are sisters.
And Marlene's related to Erickson some way or other,
And I live
that's
by,
your maiden name. Yeah.
Dorothy.
so we have a lot of,
Chuck
yeah.
and Dorothy.
Check it, yeah.
Was the Nevers Dam, was that a private enterprise
Yeah,
to keep the logs flowing down the river smoothly?
Yeah, we have a display a little bit in there and a couple of booklets on it, but they started logging up in this area. The treaty with the Indians was 1837, and that's when they started logging the white pine along the St Croix, and then Trade River earlier, and then it kept going on up. And so every year in the spring, they'd run logs down like Trade River with a bunch of dams along the way. every place they put a dam is another town, like Atlas and Trade Lake and Trade River were all logging dams. But anyway, they, in the spring, there would be so many logs coming down that when they got down to St. Croix Falls, in that, there was rapids from Wolf Creek all the way to St. Croix Falls, and getting through there was pretty hard for the logs would jam up. And so the loggers, who by then had pretty much taken over Stillwater as the place where they were gonna saw the lumber, decided that was too expensive to have that a problem. So in I believe 1888, they started building the dam, and it was probably operational by 1890. And how it worked is a big wooden dam that you could let logs through one place. And so they would wait until Stillwater said, okay, we want a bunch of logs, and we want logs from this logging company, because they were all stamped differently. So they'd sort them out at Wolf Creek, it's at Wolf Creek is where Nevers Dam is. And then they would open up the dam, flush those down, and it exactly works like a toilet, okay? You flush the logs down through, okay, because it was going through the bends. And then they'd get through, and there wasn't a problem. But the last log came into Stillwater in about 1914. So it was only like 10, 24 years that it was useful. Then they built in 1907 or 9, they built the power dam in St. Croix Falls. And that also had a gate so you could run logs through it, although it was about the end of the logging era. So then the power company Northern States bought Nevers Dam, and Nevers, the people that owned Nevers were loggers like Staples and that from Stillwater. And they owned the land on both sides of the river, so Northern States bought it up from them. And then they used the dam, Nevers Dam, until into the 40s for every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they would open it up. They had it backed up, somewhat backed up, and open it up. And by 5 o'clock at the power dam in St. Croix would be a lot of water coming through, which was sent to the Twin Cities to power people coming home from work so they could run whatever they needed with electricity. And so that was until probably the mid-40s when the dam started getting in bad repair, and they couldn't open and close it anymore, and they didn't want to spend the money on fixing it. It was all wood, and it was held in place by bunches of rocks piled up in cribs and big posts driven into the sand. There was no rock under it, so it was sort of like that foolish man built his house on the sand story, Bible thing. Well, anyway, so it would warp a little bit, and they quit fixing it. Then, so it was just left open from probably the mid-40s until it washed out in 1954. Spring of '54 was a big flood year, and my uncle, I was, well, let's see, I was about 6 years old, 4 or 8 years old. My uncle said, they said the dam is going to wash out. Let's go down, my brother said, let's go down and watch it wash out. So we went down, and of course it wouldn't wash out when you're watching it. And so we watched it for an hour, and then we went home, and it washed out overnight. And then the next day we went down and got to see a big chunk of it had broken loose and went down riverways. And so then they hired people to dismantle it, and all that's left is the earth berms coming up, some of the rock piles. But yeah, that was kind of an interesting thing. All right, and a lot of Swedish folks were involved in building that dam and working on it, because that was a local job. Besides working, they could work in the logging industry in the winter, like my great-grandfather homesteaded, and he could get a job all winter working in the logging camps. And unlike some of the unmarried loggers, he saved his money to come back and invest in the farm instead of spending it in one of those towns on booze and women. You know how the downfall of most of us, right? No, okay. So, okay, are there any other questions, or do you, okay. I'm gonna tell you, the stuff behind you is the stuff am interested in, and it's behind that wall. That's called the Obsolete Media Lab, and back there, I take things like old glass negatives, audio tapes, reel-to-reel tapes, movies, 8mm, 16mm movies, slides, VHS tapes, anything you can imagine, including all sorts of different movie camera format tapes, and convert them to digital, including scanning old record books like what we did last Monday. Bert was our volunteer here, and he sat down at one of our machines and scanned by turning the pages and pushing a foot pedal, scanned a full record book of the Laketown Lutheran Church, which we then now have a digital copy, which I then showed the person, well, look at this magic. If I send it to artificial intelligence, it actually tells us what's in that book. So anyway, that's part of the, I'm interested in that. I worked in the computer business most of my life, and so working with obsolete equipment makes me feel like I'm still competent.
Do you still have any holes that you have a wish list for?
Yeah, there's always, it's just sort of like, there were so many different ways that people stored things. For instance, old computers used floppy diskettes, 5 1/4 floppy diskettes. It's hard to find an old computer that will read those. I have one that will read one kind, but there's other kinds. And I have an old Apple IIe computer here that will read old Apple diskettes. But as you evolved through technology, things kept changing, and people have these old, well, you may all have your carousel of slides someplace, but you also might have an old VHS tape, or a old 8mm movie or something like that. And so our goal is to be able to do any of those things. And in the front here is just a display of a few like darkroom photography stuff and that. I'm cleaning out a house that I have in Minnesota that we used to live in, and in the basement, I built it in 2000, and I put a nice photo darkroom in there. And I used it about 2 years, and then I just, it's a digital world, and so that stuff is obsolete, but you still have the old negatives and the slides around, and you need to get them. So anyway, and how I usually do this, we don't charge for that service. If you want to do some, you bring them in and we teach you how to sit down at a machine and do it yourself, so that we don't have to spend the time doing it ours. Our current project, though, that we're actually doing is every piece of obsolete media in the Polk County Museum, every slide, every negative, every, not paper stuff, but every film, VHS tape and everything. And I keep saying we're 3/4 done, and then the director finds another big box. So she just brought about 200 1949 through 51 4-H slides from the extension office. So we're scanning, we're going through scanning those individual slides to bring them in digital.
How about microfiche?
We have a microfiche reader here and a microfilm one, although the microfilm one is not very efficient. When you do like an old newspaper that has on a microfilm, might have a roll that might have, 500 individual pictures on it, and so you either have to go through and move it ahead one frame at a time and then take a picture, or you try to use an automatic one. And so the experiment with an automatic one is going on at the Grantsburg Historical Society, where they bought a relatively expensive one that you're supposed to put the microfilm in the front and say go, and then it goes through frame by frame and takes a picture of each one and says when it's done. And the problem with that is it's not smart enough to actually recognize the boundaries on these microfilm pages, so sometimes it'll do half a page on another one and that, so it's back to sort of, I mean, eventually technology will get there, but at the moment, it's just latest, but it's not very good. So although we can look at a individual microfilm frame and digitize it, that's just really not a good thing to do if you're trying to do a year of the Amory Free Press. The Amory did have that done. They paid the Wisconsin Historical Society to do several years of them. And it was like something like $80 or $100 per roll per year maybe. But and Osceola paid some too, but they quit doing it too, so we can't get it done through them now. You can send them into private places that will do it. If you want to have your old record books or school yearbooks done, there's a prison in Oklahoma, I think it is, that will do it for free. They take, you send your books, we did it for Lockley years ago, send them down there, then they did it and they send you back a diskette or a CD or something with the files on it, and then they turn around and sell it to these places on the, like Ancestry or someplace that wants to look at them. So you can get it done for free, but you're sort of sharing the information, which is okay.
And you get the books back.
Yeah. The Genealogy Society, I'm a member of that too. Polk County Genealogy Society is headquartered over in the Luck Museum, and we have summer activities. Our next one is coming up. It's always the fourth Monday of the month. The next one is at 1 o'clock at the Luck Museum on the fourth Monday of August. And one of our members is going to talk about using artificial intelligence to do your family history. It's an interesting thing. I tried it using one of these, and it found some things and some things that was wrong, and you can't be, you know, anyway, it's interesting though. All right, so
Russ, have you invented an artificial intelligence stuff? I'd kind of like to have my family history done like yours up here.
The creative fictional version, right?
Yes,
yes. I was gonna say that allows you a lot of leeway, as you probably noticed, that you can kind
I
of
think you could probably do it.
see what happened to the people that lived in Sweden 100,000 years ago when the glaciers came down. So you think, well, they must have gone farther south, and so I thought Italy would be a good place to winter over until or maybe Africa, I don't know. so anyway, yeah. All right, so the thing at Polk Museum has laid out some farm stuff, some Cushing baseball, Tigers baseball team. They were nuts about baseball in town. Back in the corner is Lake Town Atlas and Alabama information. A little bit of mixture of Cushing stuff. And then over in the other room is separated into like Sterling area, Eureka area.
Shirley and
The
Eureka.
old Cushing
And
post
the
office is
school.
in there. One corner has the pulpit, well, the altar and the altar rail from the Swedish Lutheran Church out on the Barrens, and some of the records. We have the records. It's interesting. We wanted the records of that church out on the Barrens, the Swedish one. And so we went up to the Trade Lake Zion Lutheran, which kept some of them. And there was some of them there. I got an ear thinking about them. Anyway, but Clayton Jurgensen, who was Danish, said, well, the Swedish Lutherans up there had all these old record books, and they were in the basement, so they put them over in the horse barn, and then the horse barn leaked on them, and so then they tossed them. Okay, and so I thought, okay, we're never ever going to find the records I want. But it turns out that the Mormon Church in about 1960 had come through and photographed everything that they had at Trade Lake Zion, and eventually it wandered its way onto Ancestry.com. And so now you can actually search on the records of that church out on the Barrens or the Trade Lake Zion Lutheran on Ancestry, if you can figure your way into it. But it's really quite amazing in my mind that that happened because,
Did you say the Mormon?
yeah, for those of us who are in ancestry, in genealogy, Mormons are the best possible keepers of old records. It's based on a religious teaching they have that says, every religion believes that your religion is the one true route to get to heaven and, eternal bliss, and everybody else is probably wrong. Our church at Trade River Evangelical Free Church knew we were right, but we thought Baptists probably would get in because they're pretty good. But anyway, so the Mormons had this view that if you're not a Mormon, you're really not going to get the reward, the hereafter, whatever the reward is. I don't know it. But one of my friends at where I worked at Mayo Clinic was a Mormon, and he got me into the family history thing because he said, "Oh, you can go over and use our records because we have a family history center in Rochester." And and I said, "Well, I'm not a Mormon." He said, "They don't care." And so anyway, I used that, and he said the reason was it's your obligation as a Mormon to get your relatives into heaven. And if they didn't know about us, you can retroactively give them an opportunity, a get out of hell free card. And so you just have to find them, and that your ancestor, do a little ritual, they call it, I don't remember what they call it, but it's a little bit like a baptism or something, retroactively on this person. And sitting down there burning away in hell, suddenly he has the opportunity, or she has the opportunity to say, "Yeah, I think I'll become a Mormon and get the hell out of hell." So that meant that it was your obligation to find your ancestors, and so the Mormon Church, with that belief, went and photographed every possible record they could find in any church all around the world, anything they could find. And they've kept doing it, and so there's just unbelievable resources available, and they're gradually making them available online and digital. But yeah, I think that's however that got into their belief, it sure was a wonderful thing for those of us who do family history.
Yeah.
Isn't Family Search their website?
Yeah, Family Search is theirs, and that's a free one. It has a lot of stuff. If you don't want to pay for Ancestry, you can use Family Search, get an account, and I use that quite a bit too. And they do not try to convert you or anything. They just present the information. So.
And the Amory Historical Society is affiliated with the Family Search. So things you can't get at home, you can at the Amory Historical Society.
And also Barron County has a family history center like Rochester did, where they actually have someone there to help. Because I didn't really know how to use their records, and someone at the place said, "Oh, your ancestor came from Shia Parish in Sweden." I had found that out from an immigration paper. And she said, this is like 30 years ago, let's get the microfilms for the parish records from Salt Lake City, bring them up here, it costs you $3 a piece for 3 of them, and then I'll help you find out what it says. And so that was really that's how it got me started in them. But yeah, and I didn't convert. I'm still, I don't know what you call that, as a Swedish. I still wonder if Baptists are really going to get into heaven.
Poor Marley. We're rooting for you, Marley.
Yeah, okay. All right, so let's so you can look around if you have any questions or anything.
You'll be second.
Yeah, we have some lemonade, coffee, all that stuff, so help yourself.
Russ, I want to thank you for having us here today, and thank you for the work that you do every day.
Thank you, Russ.
And I always could use volunteers here to sit at a machine.
Oh.